It was 1964 when I first saw the river. The Mekong didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a living thing. Wide, slow, and ancient, carrying more secrets than anyone could count. I was told I'd be advising the local forces on river patrol tactics. Not fighting, just helping them help themselves. That's how they phrased it. Soft enough to sound like diplomacy, vague enough to mean anything. We landed in Saigon and everything smelled like rot and jet fuel. I'd been in country less than a week when a lieutenant in mirrored sunglasses tossed me a folder marked non-combat assistance. He said it with a smirk, like even he didn't believe it. You'll be based in the Delta. Just a few patrols, some training. You'll hardly hear a shot fired. The thing about lies like that, they're not really lies. They're just wishes wearing uniforms. The outpost wasn't on any map I'd seen. A scattering of tin-roofed huts and sandbags along a muddy bank, about 70 miles south of anywhere you could call civilization. The men there, a handful of American advisors, a dozen South Vietnamese troops, and 2 interpreters who looked like they hadn't slept in a month. They called it Camp 47, but no one knew what happened to Camps 1 through 46. The commanding officer, Major Harrigan, met me by the dock. He looked like he'd been boiled, red face, white hair stuck to his forehead. "Welcome to the end of the earth, Captain," he said. "Don't drink the water and don't believe anything that smiles at you." That first evening, I stood by the river and watched the current pull at the reeds. It wasn't the kind of river you swim in. It was thick, the color of wet tea, and it moved like it was dragging ghosts along the bottom. Somewhere upstream, kids were laughing. Somewhere downstream, someone fired a single shot. I remember thinking it was all strangely calm, like standing in the eye of something that hadn't arrived yet. Our orders were simple. Help the ARVN, that's the South Vietnamese Army, conduct river security patrols. Teach them how to board suspicious sampans, how to map routes, how to stay alert. The problem was, no one seemed to know who we were protecting, or from whom. Command back in Saigon sent us maps that didn't match the terrain. Villages shown as secure were half abandoned. The locals smiled at us, but spoke only to the interpreters. When we handed out medicine and rice, they accepted it politely, and by morning the bags were gone, traded or stolen or carried into the jungle. The Vietnamese troops we trained were brave, but they carried a different kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of fighting. It was the fear of being seen fighting for the wrong side. Every man here had a cousin or a brother who joined the other camp. The river ran between them like a line on a grave. At night, the jungle never stopped talking. Frogs, insects, something else. A rhythm beneath it all, as if the earth itself was breathing. We slept in shifts, half awake, rifles stacked beside the door. Every few hours a flare would pop somewhere far away, painting the tree line in white. It looked almost beautiful, if you didn't know what it meant. The first briefing we got from Saigon said, "The enemy is limited to small insurgent elements." I wrote that phrase in my notebook and underlined it. Later, one of the ARVN sergeants, a man named Bao, laughed when he saw it. "Small elements," he said, "like water. You can't see it until you're drowning." Bao had been fighting longer than I'd been shaving. He told me once that the river used to be sacred, that its name, in the old dialect, meant the mother who gives and takes. When I asked him what it meant now, he said, "Now, it just takes." By the end of that first week, I stopped calling it an advisory mission. Not because anyone corrected me, but because the river already had. We found our first body on the 5th day, caught in a net downstream. Not a soldier, just a farmer with a bullet hole clean through his chest. Major Harrigan ordered it logged as unconfirmed hostile. That was the phrase that kept us alive on paper. Unconfirmed. It meant we could look away and still believe we were doing good work. That night I wrote my first letter home. I told my wife the sunsets here were beautiful, that the people were kind, and that the work was important. Then I folded it, sealed it, and stared at it until the generator died. The river glowed faintly in the moonlight, wide and still. It didn't move fast, but you could feel it pulling. Not the kind of pull you fight against, the kind that waits until you stop resisting. Morning came heavy and wet, the kind of air that sticks to your lungs before you can breathe it out. The Mekong had risen overnight, flooding the lower sandbags. I remember standing barefoot in the mud outside the barracks, watching the brown water climb the posts like it was coming for us. That was the day we started the river patrols. The patrol boat we had was a tired piece of aluminum that rattled when you started her engine. We called her Lucky One, mostly as a joke. She wasn't fast, she wasn't armed for much, and she leaked around the seams like an old man's eyes. But she floated, and that was enough for command to check their box marked operational. The first patrol was supposed to be simple. A loop upriver, check a few fishing villages, make a report. The South Vietnamese soldiers loaded up without much talk. They'd done this before. I could tell by the way they moved, slow, cautious, like the river was listening. I sat near the bow, my boots soaking through, radio pressed against my chest like a heartbeat I could control. We drifted for hours through green tunnels of mangrove and fog. The jungle leaned so close over the water it felt like the world was closing in. Every few minutes the sound of an oar, a bird, or something breaking the surface. Then silence again. That's how the river talks, in whispers and interruptions. The Vietnamese sergeant, Bao, kept his eyes on the banks. "They watch from there," he said softly, pointing with his chin. "Sometimes they wave, sometimes they don't." I asked him if he'd ever seen the Viet Cong up close. He smiled, not kindly. "Only when they want to be seen." Around midday we passed a small hamlet. 3 huts on stilts and a wooden jetty half sunk into the water. A few women were washing clothes, children running along the edge. They stopped when they saw us. Just stopped. No waving, no smiling, just silence. The kind that makes you realize how loud your own presence is. I waved anyway, out of habit more than hope. One of the women nodded, then turned away. Bao muttered something under his breath. When I asked him what, he said, "They think you bring rain." I didn't understand what he meant until later. We found the first sampan drifting alone near a bend, nets still inside, no one aboard. The motor was gone, ropes cut clean. The ARVN soldiers searched it. Nothing but wet rice, some tools, and a family photograph tucked into a tin can. A man, a woman, and a boy. Bao looked at it for a while, then handed it to me. "They don't leave pictures behind unless they know they're not coming back," he said. We kept moving. The heat got thicker, the air quieter. Then, sometime in the afternoon, the first shots came. Quick, sharp, echoing across the water. 3 rounds, maybe 4. None of us saw where they came from. The jungle looked exactly the same. Our gunner fired back blindly into the trees, the sound slamming against the air like thunder. Birds scattered. Then silence again. After a while, Major Harrigan's voice crackled through the radio, calm as if we'd called in a weather report. "No confirmed contact, Captain. Stay on course." That's when I realized we weren't supposed to find the enemy. We were supposed to look like we were looking. That night, the men sat on the dock smoking, the boat rocking gently against the current. One of the younger Americans, a corporal named Rains, asked if it was always going to be like this. "Floating around, waiting to get shot at by ghosts," he said. I told him that was the job. We keep the river safe. The words tasted foolish as soon as I said them. The truth was, the river didn't need us. It had its own patrol, one made of fog, fish, and memory. We were just intruders, waiting to be corrected. 2 days later, we went back out. Different direction this time. More of the same. Heat, silence, suspicion. Bao said we'd entered what locals called the Mouth of Ghosts, a stretch of river that curved sharply between two ridges. Bad place, he whispered. Too much history. About an hour in, we found a hut hidden among the mangroves, smoke still rising from the ashes. The door was torn off, the ground scorched. By the third week, the river had already changed us. The men stopped shaving. Shirts stuck to skin and stayed that way. The mosquitoes were relentless. Not the kind you swat away, but the kind that wait until you've forgotten them. Everything stank of wet canvas, oil and mildew. The jungle grew closer each day, as if it was tired of waiting for us to leave. Command had new orders. A nearby village called Ban Ha had gone silent. No radio contact, no supply pickup. We were to investigate. That word, investigate, sounded official enough to hide what it really meant. Find out who's still alive. It was dawn when we left camp. The sky a dull grey sheet. The lucky one carried 7 of us that day. Me, Rains, Bao, 2 ARVN soldiers, the interpreter Lin, and a mechanic who shouldn't have been there but volunteered anyway. The river was glassy, unnaturally still. Even the birds were quiet. Lin broke the silence first. Ban Ha used to trade fish for salt, he said. Good people there. He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared at the water. Bao murmured a prayer in Vietnamese I didn't understand. I could tell no one wanted to reach that village. Not even the river seemed to flow in that direction willingly. We turned the last bend before Ban Ha around midday. The smell hit us first. Burned wood, diesel, and something else, something human. Smoke hung low over the water. The huts were blackened skeletons. No people, no animals, just silence and ash. We beached the boat and walked inland. The mud sucked at our boots like it wanted to keep us. Every step made a sound that didn't belong. I remember thinking how loud my breathing was. Rains kicked something half buried in the dirt, a cooking pot bent in half. There was a handprint burned into its side. We found bodies near the well. Men, women, children. All unarmed. Some shot, some burned. I don't remember who spoke first, but I remember the sound, that quiet gasp that escapes when your mind refuses to understand what your eyes already have. Bao said nothing. He just walked to one of the huts and tore down what was left of the roof. Underneath was a radio, US issue. That's when we knew. Someone had used Ban Ha as bait. The enemy drew them out with false calls for help, waited for the response, then hit them hard enough to erase the map. It wasn't war. It was bookkeeping. Lives traded for coordinates. Lin found footprints leading toward the tree line. One survived, he whispered. Maybe. We followed them 100 yards in before Bao stopped us. Not safe, he said flatly. They watch. Always. He was right. The jungle felt awake. Every leaf seemed to hold its breath. Then, from somewhere beyond the trees, we heard a voice. A boy's voice. Singing, softly, almost cheerful. A Vietnamese lullaby. Bao froze. That's not real, he said. They play recordings now. And then, a single shot. High caliber. It took Lin in the shoulder and spun him sideways into the mud. The men opened fire toward the trees, shouting in 2 languages, panic and smoke filling the air. I crawled toward Lin, pressed my hand over the wound. He was crying. Not from pain. From fear. It's my village, he said. It was my village. We dragged him back to the boat, bullets stitching the water behind us. Bao shouted directions, voice cutting through the chaos. When the motor finally caught, we sped downriver blind, branches whipping our faces, the sound of gunfire fading behind. We didn't speak the whole way back. Lin kept whispering his mother's name until he passed out. The sun set red, bleeding into the water until it was impossible to tell which was which. That night, the Mekong looked like it was carrying fire instead of reflection. Major Harrigan met us at the dock. He listened to my report without blinking, then said, "File it as hostile contact, civilians unconfirmed." His face didn't change when I mentioned the children. He just said, "This is what happens when you can't tell which side's which." I asked him what we were supposed to do next. He said, "Keep patrolling." That was the moment something cracked. Not loudly, just enough that I could feel the air rush in. The mission, the maps, the words like advisory and pacification, none of them mattered anymore. The war wasn't somewhere out there in the jungle. It was in the water, seeping into everything it touched. Later that night, I sat by the river, holding the photograph we'd found in the empty sampan. The family of 3. The man, the woman, the boy. I tried to imagine their faces, smiling, alive, but all I could see was smoke and water. The river made no sound that night. Not even the insects dared to speak. It just moved, slow and certain, as if it already knew where the next body would float. That's when it hit me. We weren't fighting anyone anymore. We were placeholders, a line on a chart meant to justify the last one. A week later, the rain stopped for a single night. The air turned electric, heavy with silence. The kind of silence that warns you before something arrives. I was outside, cleaning my weapon when Rains came running from the dock. "Captain," he gasped, "they're here." At first I thought he meant reinforcements, but when I got to the bank I saw it. 3 boats drifting downriver, no lights, no sound. Each carried bodies, tied upright, hands folded like they were sleeping. South Vietnamese uniforms, US helmets, faces pale and bloated, eyes open. The current carried them right past us, one after another, slow as funeral barges. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The jungle did all them. The jungle did all the talking. A low hiss of wind through wet leaves. Bao whispered, "The river collects what we forget." Then he took off his hat and bowed his head. The Arvan soldiers followed. The Americans just stared, frozen in that sick kind of disbelief that feels like guilt. When dawn came, Harrigan ordered us to bury what we could. "Unconfirmed casualties," he said. "No photographs." But the smell stayed. It stayed long after the graves filled with water. That was the last time any of us saw Major Harrigan. The next morning he was gone, his cot empty, his gear left behind, his pistol missing. Maybe he went upriver. Maybe the river came for him. We never found out. After that, command stopped calling. The radio hissed and hummed, but no voices came through. The war had moved on without us. The only orders left were the ones the river gave. I started to believe Bao then, that the river wasn't just water. It was memory. It carried everything. The blood, the lies, the men who disappeared. It didn't care which flag you wore. It just remembered you. And when it was ready, it called you back. That night, as I sat by the water, I saw something glowing faintly beneath the surface. Maybe a reflection, maybe a trick of the moonlight. But I swear I heard it whisper, just barely, "Stay." By the time the monsoon came, the smell of rot had become part of us. Everything, the tents, the rations, the uniforms, carried that wet, sweet stench that seeps into your skin and won't wash off. The river swelled until it swallowed whole trees. The outpost became an island of mud, and we became its prisoners. Lin survived his wound, but didn't talk much after Ban Ha. He sat by the water for hours, sharpening a stick with a dull knife, carving patterns into the mud like maps only he could read. Bao kept the men busy, fixing boats that didn't need fixing, cleaning rifles that wouldn't fire right in the humidity anyway. Anything to stop them from thinking too long. I spent my days writing reports I knew no one was going to read. Enemy contact minimal. Civilian presence undetermined. It was the same language we all used, words that sounded like progress but meant nothing. When I asked Major Harrigan what the point was anymore, he said, "The point is to stay here. The moment we leave, they win." But staying felt less like holding ground and more like sinking into it. Every day the jungle grew thicker, the river louder. You could hear things moving at night, not people, just things. The kind of noises that made you wish you couldn't hear. One morning, Bao came to me with a strange look. "Captain," he said, "the river brought something." We followed him down to the bank. There, caught against the roots, was a wooden crate, American, marked with faded stencils. We pried it open and found inside radio batteries, bandages, and a sealed envelope. The message inside was half dissolved by water, but I could still read the first line. "To be delivered to MACV Command, Saigon. Urgent." No one said it, but we all felt the same thing. This crate wasn't lost. It was left. Rains looked at the sky, muttering, "Guess the war finally sent us mail." He tried to laugh. No one did. That night, Bao approached me again, quietly this time. "Captain," he said, "we need to leave." The men whisper. They say the river is cursed, that it wants us now. I told him I didn't believe in curses. He said, "Then believe in men who do." The next morning we got new orders from Saigon. A coded transmission through static. "Maintain position. Reinforcements delayed. Keep the river open." That was it. No signature. No acknowledgement of Ban Ha. Just a command from a voice we couldn't see. I remember slamming my hand on the table. "Keep the river open for who?" I asked. Harrigan didn't even look up from his map. "For whoever's next," he said. The order came at dawn. No discussion, no warning. Just a printed sheet slid under my door while the rain hammered the roof like a warning we were too dumb to hear. It said, "Recon up Mekong Sector 12B. Possible high-value target. Proceed with discretion." That word again. Discretion. It always meant alone. I found Bao already awake, boiling water for tea that tasted like rust. "We're going upriver," I told him. He didn't ask why, just nodded once and said, "Then we'll need more fuel than faith." Rains muttered, "High-value target, my ass." They said the same thing about Ban Ha. But he still loaded the lucky one. Extra ammo, rations, a box of flares we'd never use. Lin, pale but stubborn, insisted on coming despite his shoulder wound. "If we die," he said, "I don't want to do it waiting." The sky looked like wet steel when we left the outpost. The river had swollen past its banks, brown and restless. Everything smelled like copper and rain. The jungle leaned closer than ever before, pressing in like it was listening. Hours passed without a word. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional slap of a branch against the hull. Bao steered, eyes fixed ahead. He had that look soldiers get when they already know how a story ends. Around noon, the current changed. Subtle at first, then stronger, pulling us sideways. The boat rocked. Rains cursed, grabbing the edge. "Feels wrong," he said. Bao frowned. We're over deep water. Then Lin pointed at something floating just ahead. A wooden plank, then another. Wreckage, he whispered. I shouted for Bao to cut the engine. But the moment the prop slowed, there was a sound. A sharp, metallic click beneath us. And then the world exploded. The blast tore through the bottom of the boat. Water and fire hit at once. The kind of sound that eats every other sound alive. I was thrown into the river, ears ringing, lungs filling with mud. When I surfaced, I saw the Lucky One split in half, flames licking the sky. Rains was screaming for help, Bao trying to pull him free from the wreckage. Lin clung to the radio box like it was salvation. "Get to the bank!" I yelled. But gunfire cracked from the tree line, high, distant, precise. Rounds slapped the water inches from my head. Bao went down first, hit in the chest. He didn't make a sound, just folded forward, face disappearing beneath the current. Rains dragged him towards the mud, shouting something I couldn't hear over the roar. The air smelled of gasoline and burnt cloth. I found Lin half submerged, still clutching the radio. Static hissed through the speaker, voices breaking in and out. "Copy? Location?" Then another shot. The radio cracked apart. Blood blooming through his shirt. He looked up at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Tell them," he started, but the words never finished. I grabbed him by the shoulders, pulled him toward the reeds. Rains appeared beside me, face black with smoke. "They're not stopping," he gasped. "They're hurting us." We crawled through the mud, the jungle swallowing us whole. Every sound became a question, a branch breaking, a drop of water, a breath too close. The sniper fire slowed, replaced by silence. Worse than bullets. We made it maybe half a mile inland before Rains collapsed. His leg was shredded by shrapnel. I tore my shirt to stop the bleeding, but it kept coming. "You leave me, Captain," he said, voice breaking. "I ain't dying twice." I told him to shut up and keep breathing. He laughed, a dry, empty sound. "Ain't that what we've been doing since we got here?" I carried him on my back for hours, or maybe minutes, it's hard to tell in that kind of heat. The jungle blurred into one long nightmare of green and red. His breath got lighter, then it stopped. By the time I reached the ridge, night had fallen. The rain started again, soft at first, then heavy, washing away blood, prints, everything. I laid Rains down beside a banyan tree and sat there until the sun rose, waiting for a sound, a chopper, a voice, anything. None came. The radio was gone, the map was gone. The Lucky One was gone. The war itself might as well have been gone too. I was the only thing left that remembered. When I finally stumbled back to base 3 days later, half the camp didn't believe me. They said there was no record of a patrol that day, no orders issued, no transmissions logged. Bao, Rains, Lin, their names weren't even on the roster anymore. Major Harrigan was gone too. Just an empty cot. His nameplate pried off. They told me I must have gotten turned around, maybe imagined the explosion. Heatstroke, fatigue, stress. But when I closed my eyes that night, I saw the river again, red and endless, carrying pieces of the Lucky One downstream, like it was returning what it borrowed. That's when I realized something simple, something terrible. The river doesn't take men, it absorbs them. It keeps their stories so no one else has to. The river took them all, and left me to explain a story no one wanted to hear. The world reduced to memory. The survivor carrying silence heavier than any body. It's strange how the river looks smaller now. I came back 40 years later, when the world had forgotten what it once swallowed. The Mekong no longer smelled of fuel and fear. It smelled like wet earth, grilled fish, and the faint sweetness of diesel from the boats of men who only know it is home. They told me it had changed. The banks widened, the currents tamed by new dams, bridges, progress. But when I stood there on that muddy edge, I saw it the same way I did in 1969. The light still bent the same way off the water. The air still hummed with invisible heat. Only the faces were different. There was a school near where our outpost once stood. Children ran barefoot through the grass, shouting and laughing, their voices spilling into the river like music. I could hear a teacher's voice calling after them in Vietnamese, a sound that, back then, would have made my heart tense. Now it made it ache in a different way. A fisherman recognized the patch on my jacket, the faded American flag I'd kept sewn inside since the war. He approached me, cautious but kind, and said through a translator, "You were here when the sky burned." I nodded. He smiled, not out of joy, but out of something gentler, forgiveness maybe, or pity. "Then you are part of the river," he said. That night, I sat by the water, the same stretch where the lucky one had vanished. The air was still, the moonlight thin as smoke. I reached into my pocket and pulled out what I'd carried all these years. Bough's lighter, still dented, still useless. I turned it over in my hands until the metal grew warm, as if it remembered the fire that killed him. A boy wandered over, curious, holding a flashlight. He pointed to the edge of the river where the mud had peeled back from the last rainstorm. "Old metal," he said in Vietnamese, and dug with his bare hands until he lifted something small, rusted. He handed it to me. Dog tags, American issue. The name had almost worn away, but I could still make out the first few letters. Rye. I didn't say anything. I just held it, mud dripping between my fingers, and realized that even after decades, the river still gave back what we left behind. Slowly, quietly, without asking permission. The locals said that sometimes, after heavy rain, the river runs red again. Not blood, just silt and clay from upstream. But they tell it like a story, like the water remembers too much to stay clean. "It bleeds when the sky weeps," one old man told me, smiling through missing teeth. I looked upriver, toward the bend where Ban Ha used to be. There was nothing left. No marker, no graves, no ruins. Just a wide green plain, dotted with banana trees and laughter. It felt wrong that it could be beautiful again. But maybe that's what time does. It lets beauty and horror live in the same soil. People ask me why I came back. I don't tell them it's because I couldn't sleep without the sound of the water in my ears, or that every time it rained back home, I'd see faces in the streaks on the glass. Bao, Lin, Rains. I just say, to pay respects. But the truth is, I came back to make sure the river still existed, and to see if I did too. When I left the village, I stood at the dock one last time and looked down. The river moved slow, patient, unbothered. I could almost hear it breathing. Somewhere beneath that current lay the bones of boats, men, orders, lies. Everything that once made sense to someone. I dropped Bao's lighter into the water. It sank fast, leaving just a small circle of ripples that spread, then disappeared. The boy who'd found the tags asked me something in Vietnamese I didn't understand. The translator said, "He asks what the river said to you." I looked out at the horizon, the sun rising red and gold, and said, "It told me it remembers. The river doesn't forget. It just waits for silence. We thought we were crossing it to win a war. Turns out, we were just learning how deep it could run." The survivor reconciles memory, loss, and forgiveness under the weight of history. The final cadence fades like water lapping against the hull of a forgotten boat. If you've made it this far, thank you. These stories take time to tell, and even longer to understand. You've just walked through the memories of men who were never supposed to be remembered, If their voices meant something to you, if even one line stayed behind when the sound faded, don't let it disappear. Give this video a like, share it with someone who still believes history belongs to the living, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. Every episode here is another page, another life, another truth pulled out of the smoke. Drop a comment too, not for the algorithm, but for the conversation. Tell me what you felt, or what you remember hearing from your own fathers, grandfathers, uncles, or friends. That's how these memories stay alive. Subscribe, stay with us, and let's keep turning the pages together.